Hi guys, welcome to one of the games that will help you grow your chess knowledge and teach you some strategic ideas combined with some tactical theme that would help you grow in your chess game. This is a game played between Robert James Fischer and Boris Spassky in the match in 1972. This is game 6. Let's enjoy the beauty this game has so far. There are many ideas in this game, so let's dive right into it. Robert James Fischer played the white pieces. So, he started with pawn to c4. After c4, Boris Spassky went for e6. Knight to f3, d5, challenging the pawn on c4. Fischer decided to ignore taking this pawn. Instead, he played pawn to d4. Knight to f6, knight to c3, bishop to e7, bishop to g5. Boris Spassky castled fast. After Fischer played e3, what is the idea behind e3? e3 is intending to open this diagonal for the bishop to come outside and still defend the pawn on c4. Then in the future, there are ideas like bishop moving over to d3 so that the king can be castled to the short side. After h6, attacking the bishop. You won't develop a bishop when this bishop here on g5 is under attack by a pawn. A simple understanding in this position tells us that the piece is under attack. There's a threat which we need to attend to before coming back to our initial plan. In this position here, Fischer displayed defense before attack. So he moved his bishop back to h4 to a safe square. After b6, we have pawn takes, knight takes on d5. Now opening this diagonal to this bishop. So Fischer, instead of taking the knight first, decided to go with the variation which contains bishop takes bishop, queen takes the bishop, knight takes knight on d5. Now pawn takes the knight on d5. Rook to c1 comes up. This idea is a strategic idea such that you activate a rook on an open file. Since the file is not fully free, we can call it semi-open. But if you check the number of squares which the rook covers by standing on c1, you will notice that he covers large number of squares. So it makes the rook more active compared to where he was or where it was on a1 before. Bishop goes to e6, queen to a4, c5 comes up, queen to a3. In this position, you must observe what just happened. Fischer's last move, queen to a3, creates a tactical theme known as the pin. In this case, how? If this pawn eventually captures the pawn in the center on d4, the queen, which is undefended here on e7, will be captured by the white queen. And that is a lot of material in a game like this for white. So, how can you manage this? There are other approaches. Instead of taking the pawn, you can choose to leave it this way and play another piece in your own game. So, what did Spassky do? Spassky chose to play rook to c8, which is simple. Ignoring taking this pawn, keeping the tension, and still not blundering the queen. So, bishop to b5 comes up, activating a bishop on a free diagonal. We can learn from this activity. These are Fischer concepts, and with these ideas, he has won many games. Putting your pieces on squares that give them maximum ability, space, and attack more squares is called positional play. Let me take that again. When you put your piece on squares that give them maximum mobility, such as the bishop moving to b5 and when the rook was moved to c1, we call that positional play, positioning your pieces on good squares that enable them do more for you in the game. So a6 comes up. Why a6? Trying to kick the bishop away and not allow the bishop the activity on this active diagonal. Well, we should observe. When you look at your board carefully, you will see where the problems are. Now, Boris played a6. He created a problem for himself in the sense that Since the queen was standing on a3, this pawn in black stone cannot just take the bishop, simply because the pawn is now pinned to the rook that is not defended. So, what to do? Pawn takes on c5 by Fischer. Pawn takes on c5. In this case, Fischer castled. Notice how he ignored bringing the bishop home, keeping the bishop there as a bait so that pawn can take, then he can take the rook, which has higher value. So in case you are wondering why it is like this, a bishop is said to have 3 points. The rook is said to have 5 points. So if Fischer takes the rook, which is 5, and Boris takes the bishop, which is 3, do the math, who has higher points? So that is why Boris doesn't want to blunder in this position. Instead, he played rook to a7. With rook to a7, observe the position. The rook is now under the defense of the queen. So in the next move, it is likely for Boris to capture this bishop. But Fischer decided to play bishop to e2, which is logical and understanding, taking the bishop from this danger square. Knight to d7 comes up. Here, knight to d4. You wonder and say, knight to d4, how? Why is knight to d4 a good move? And why will this kind of move come to Bobby Fischer's mind in the first place? Notice that this pawn here on c5 is still pinned to the queen. And at the same time, the pawn, the rook on c8 is not defended. With a move like pawn takes knight, there are many free pieces hanging on the board. Example includes the rook and the queen. So in a variation, we can simply say, okay, since the queen is 9 points and the rook is 5 points, which will you capture at the moment? You will choose to go for the queen. In this position, you have won material. So this move is a deceptive move. It is trying to deceive Boris Spassky to take. However, Spassky did not capture. He chose to play queen to f8. Noticing the rook at the back rank on c8 is not defended. The queen, when it was on e7, when she was on e7, was not defended. So going back home to f8 defends the rook and keeps the queen under the protection of the king, the rook, and the knight. Knight takes the bishop on e6. Pawn takes. In this position, Fischer has a light squared bishop, which will be used to harass this pawn in the future. e4 comes up, trying to disconnect these 3 wise pawns. So, what to do? According to an analysis in this position, since this bishop is on a light square, it will make sense to keep this pawn on a light square instead. So pawn takes, pawn takes. This could be playable from here, where knight comes over to f6 and defend the pawn later on in the game in the long run. However, Boris Spassky made a choice that cost him some tempos in the long run by playing pawn to d4 instead. Fischer capitalized on this by pushing f4, trying to stop this move. Pawn to e5. Queen to e7, removing the queen from the attack of this particular rook, an x-ray attack. Pawn push to e5. Now, the pawn push to e5 paralyzes this pawn in the long run. The pawn is now blocked, and throughout from this position, the pawn becomes a target. Let's watch how it happened. The idea here is strategic, simply because put this pawn here on e6 becomes a weakness, which Boris guarded, and Fischer maneuvered his pieces towards an attack that ended up giving him huge advantage. See what he did. First of all, after rook to b8, activating the rook on this free particular file, here bishop comes in first. Putting bishop on c4 is one of the beautiful approach here to go after this pawn. Then the next approach is to bring the queen to h3 and pressurize the pawn further. At the moment, since the king is still standing on g8, the pawn is pinned to the king. King moved away to unpin. We have queen to h3, allowing this to happen. Why? If Spassky take the pawn now, then bishop takes, knight goes, then bishop comes back. This variation is as simple as this. The bishop now controls a large number of squares through this diagonal, thereby making this knight not active in the game. At the moment, the knight should have been an attacking force, but where the knight is standing is not supporting in any activity such as attacking at the moment. Then the only strong active piece from black's camp is this rook. No supporter yet. And for you to navigate your pieces towards supporting this rook to make a checkmate would take a lot of moves. Here, in this particular position, we did not have it in the game. Instead, the game continued after queen to h3. But Spassky says, okay, instead of taking this pawn right away, I'm going to first of all defend this pawn. And he did that with the knight, holding the pawn, preparing to play rook takes pawn. And a pawn advantage between two grandmasters game can sometimes lead to a win. So, Bobby Fischer defended by pushing the pawn forward, keeping it under the protection of the bishop on c4. Pawn push, we have pawn push. Pawn takes, rook takes, with the intention to free up this particular f1 square so as to bring in the second rook and take full dominance of this f file, while planning a strategic activity towards making checkmate on the black king. Knight goes to h7. I looked at this position, I was like, okay, knight may try to come here at the moment to harass the queen. But harassing the queen will not achieve much because there's a simple move like this queen to g3, then pawn to h4 as planned to kick off the knight and still continue with the attacking. Then at the meantime, let's not forget, since the bishop is standing here on this particular diagonal, we could actually use a system to play the rook on f7 so as to kick the queen away and pick up the undefended rook later in the future. What to do? What do we see Fischer do? Fischer went on with the simplest idea, positioning the rook on f1, doubling forces so as to take full dominance of that f file. The queen moved away because of the concept of rook to f7 and kicking the queen away, then taking. So to avoid losing tempo and losing material, this move was played earlier. Here, queen comes in, rook comes up, pawn push, stopping the knight from coming to this square. There's already a pawn stopping the knight, so it's as if Spassky is playing with one piece down from this position. Rook on b to b7, we have pawn push, freeing this square, then taking more dominance on f7. What to do? Rook on b to c7, we have queen to e5. In this position, queen to e8, then we have a4. a4 is intending to play the bishop to b5 and still kick away this queen. So Boris saw this idea and played queen to d8. After rook from the one side to f2, we have queen. Rook on 2 to f3, we have this. Then we have this move. In this position, after queen move, then queen and the bishop form battery to make a checkmate along this diagonal. Now, this is what I saw here. In this position, if Boris had gone for rook take pawn, then he had blundered. This is the idea. Rook takes, check. That's the idea. So if knight takes, rook takes again, queen takes, then queen over to h7 is checkmate. Another variation includes where after taking this pawn, then rook check comes up. If the queen takes instead, then queen takes, the knight is checkmate. So after queen to e4, knight to f6 comes instead. This is the position where Bobby Fischer in 1972 made a brilliant move. This move was brilliant before the invention of most chess engine today that accredits this particular move. So Fischer made a brilliant move, and that is rook take the knight on f6. Very powerful. What does this achieve? You're about to find out. Pawn takes, rook takes on f6, reinforcing the threat to take the pawn with check, and also trying to plan against coming to the background and taking away the queen, winning material and thereby winning the game in general. Now king to g8. Here, bishop to c4 comes up, cementing the defense on the pawn. Rook to h8 back, then we have queen to f4. After queen to f4, Boris Spassky on move 41 resigned, because in this position, checkmate is unavoidable and the queen is in trouble. So you can let me leave it to you. Drop your idea in the comment section. Let's talk about it in the comments from this position. How do you finish up from here? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video on this channel.